So once again, good afternoon to everyone, and welcome to the accessibility webinar. And today's topic, we are going to cover alternative text image descriptions. Now, as you know, we do have a three series of presentation about ADA accessibility that we started a couple of weeks ago. We already have the first one, which covered how you can create descriptive links, and also how you can ensure that any text you put in bright space, you are aware of the color coding and the colors that you select. In other words, to make sure that if you have a color, any font with any color, that particular color is ADA compliant. So today we do have with us one of our specialists, Miss Sarah Ratliff. She's coming from the ADA, or the Disability Access Center at Harold Washington. She's going to be the one conducting the webinar. So she will go through some important information about some of the stuff that we want all online instructors to take into account when they are teaching online, and also change some of their content to ensure that they are in compliance with the Section 508 from the federal government. So I'm handing it over to her. She's going to be the one doing the training. Thank you. So, Sarah, it's now up to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Sarah. Thank you for joining me today. So today we're going to talk about alternate text image descriptions. So what are alternate text image descriptions? Any image that is informative and provides pertinent information that a student will use to conceptualize any of your teaching points would need a description. And using alternate text descriptions allows for students with disabilities the opportunity to alternately grasp concepts presented in those images. And that goal is to provide enough detail to convey the concept, but the description should not attempt to teach the concept. And this will allow all of our students with disabilities that are using assistive technology such as screen magnification, or a popular one that we use on our campuses called JAWS, to allow them that once that software hits that image, there's no way for that software to know what that image is unless there's a special tag to that image. So unless the publisher has mentioned what this image contains, if you put it up on Brightspace, if you're able to find the description of the image because it was mentioned in the textbook, if not, you have to create a description for it, and that's what we're going to go over today. So there are two types of alternate text for informative images that we'll go over today. One is called alt text, or alternative text, and that's for shorter descriptions. It basically includes basic information to give you details of what's occurring in the image, and it's very basic information. But there are some times when you have an image that conveys a lot of information, and you need sometimes a paragraph or two to describe what's happening in that image. And those are image descriptions, which means they're more detailed. And they basically take what the alternate text, or the shorter description, gives you, and it gives greater detail of what the picture is trying to convey. So how do you create them? Well, the first thing you're going to need to determine is, what do you need that image to convey? Is it decorative, meaning it's just up there for stress relief, or does it convey some important information? If it's decorative, if it's a picture of a flower, you would say a picture of a sunflower. That's a decorative image. You can say it's a decorative image of a sunflower. But if you have some mathematical equation to find out how many petals are on the sunflower, then you're going to have to give either an alternate text, a shorter description, or depending on how much detail you want to give, you're going to have to give a longer description. It all depends on how you're going to use that image. So a few examples of images that need to have this alternate text would be, of course, informative images, so anything that's going to be pertinent and give important details. Things like charts, graphs, and tables. Those have a lot of information, or they could have a little bit of information. But because those charts and graphs, when they're printed, they're on paper, so it's treated as an image when screen readers encounter them. So they don't always have the ability to find out what that text is within that chart image. So that information needs to be conveyed in a separate way. And anytime you have images, whether they're decorative or pertinent, and they have text written on them. So a good example of that would be comic strips. There is a textbook that uses basically comic strips throughout the entire textbook. So those comic strips, each of those cells would have to be, if they were put up on Brightspace, they would have to be described. So what are the characters? You have to identify what the subject is, what's happening, and also what the words are that's listed on that image, because that's important information. Because it's superimposed on the image, again, screen readers won't be able to necessarily access that image with the text effectively. And just because an image has a lot of detail doesn't mean it isn't decorative. So it just depends on how you're going to use it. And sometimes you need to make that judgment call. So there are a few examples of images that don't necessarily need an alt text, maybe just a simple title. So again, decorative images, for our first seminar, I picked a couple of pictures where it was just a close-up picture of a baby owl, and it was used as decorative. That was the only thing that was the subject in that image, and the caption I put on there was decorative image of a baby owl. That's an example of a decorative image. Logos. So unless you're going to magnify that logo and look at specific details, logos do not need to have an alternate text, even though there might be text within them. And any type of image that has already been described in the text, you don't have to create a new description for it. Just refer the student back to that information. So if you pull an image from, say, a textbook, and it already, within that textbook, it's a textbook that has been assigned to the class, so the student should have it, you can refer that student back to the specific page number that the description is on, because you're just looking at describing the general information of what's happening, but the actual text that you pulled that image from, the text job is to provide the conceptual information so that the student can understand fully with that text provided by the publisher what's happening. Now, I know I said logos do not have to be described, but there may be times when it becomes necessary. So our first example is the Great Seal of North Carolina, and this is taken from the State Library of North Carolina website. Now, within this image, there is a lot going on. So depending on your judgment call, it could be considered decorative, or it can be considered pertinent information. So for example, an English class might just show the seal and might have an essay on the history of it, whereas a history class might take that seal and provide detailed information because of maybe special history behind why the figures are in the seal and what each symbol means. So you want to think about who your audience is and what knowledge they should already possess. You should go ahead and use terms that correlate to the discipline that the image is being used for, but try to keep the description concise. So you would describe what the subjects are doing, you would describe any important structures, pay attention to orientation of the elements when describing them. Also, if there is writing within the image, describe that verbatim as well. So if we look at the description of the Great Seal of the state of North Carolina, within the description, you would see that there are two female figures. They're wearing different colored dresses, so the orientation of who's on the left, who's on the right, because those images may represent a philosophy or an ideology that's important. And looking at the Horn of Plenty is spilling over, the placement of that. In the background, you do see mountains, and around the perimeter of the seal itself, you do have words. So you would write down all the words verbatim, so you don't have to worry about translating. That would be the job of whoever's viewing the image if they want to take that next step, or if it's in a textbook, the publisher will decide if they want to give that extra information. But you would just describe exactly how the women are sitting, what they're holding, who's on the left, who's on the right, and any other pertinent statuesque information, because those structures the mountains could represent something important. But again, that's going to be a judgment call. Now, this next example gives you two description options. So if you run out of character space as you're typing in your description once you add it in bright space, I would suggest putting the image and the description in Microsoft Word or another similar file. So that way, one, if you're going to spend time creating these descriptions, even if you're not sure if you're going to use these descriptions in subsequent semesters, that's a lot of time that you would have to spend again re-examining how you're going to describe it. So if you save it in a Microsoft Word file, you can alternately just copy and paste the information, or you can just keep it in a Microsoft Word file and upload the Microsoft Word file itself. And that way, because each upload is 1 gigabyte, so you're not technically going to get that far in a Microsoft Word file unless you're adding lots of videos in there. So the first description can be used if you're going to consider this image decorative. So say this was the cover of a novel, then the first description would be adequate because it's just the cover of the novel. We don't know if there's any other special importance because we haven't received any extra information surrounding it. You're literally just getting ready to open up the book. However, the second description is best for considering this an informative image because of the amount of details it provides. So maybe if there is a history course that is using this, that would be one discipline that might provide more detail because it may be important to know that the women are bent over and the type of tools they're using, and showing that the men, women, and children are working together because that's what's represented in the picture. But your description should be detailed but concise. So even if you have to type a long paragraph, sometimes that could be too much. Then you would just look at it again or have someone else look at it to see if you might want to make the information smaller. But if it takes 2 or 3 paragraphs to give that detailed information, then go ahead and do that, and then I would suggest putting that in Microsoft Word because that's similar. This process is what I have to go through when I have students with disabilities that request their books in an alternate format. So every time I have a math book or science book, I have to look at each figure. When you say to the student, read chapter 1, I have to take chapter 1 and look at every single image and decide how I'm going to describe that. Because if the publisher didn't do any kind of description, I have to come up with it, whether it's a chart, whether it's a graph, whether it's a picture. I have to decide if it's decorative or if it's pertinent to the course. So this image is a great example of how a photograph can be used many different ways in a textbook. A lot of times this might be used as decorative. And depending on how you use the image, either of the two descriptions could be appropriate. So if it's just something that's used as stress relief, because a lot of publishers will do that, they'll have a lot of detailed information in their chapters, and then near the end or in between chapters, they may put just a picture that provides stress relief on the eyes. And you look at it and you know, okay, it has nothing to do with the chapter information that I just read. It's just to kind of give my eyes a break before I go into the next information. But however, say an architecture class is using this picture, instead of them saying this is a photo of modern-day downtown Louisville, Kentucky, they may point out, because of the bridge that's cable-stayed in front of all of these tall buildings, they would probably give description number 2 because it's describing the architecture. So again, it's going to depend on how you're going to use this photograph within your discipline. So you always have the option of deciding, okay, is this going to be decorative, or if it's going to be informative. And if it's informative, that's when you have to decide, okay, how much information do I need to provide to make sure that this image is conveyed to someone that may have a visual or cognitive disability. Now, for more complex images, you want to describe an image from top down and then from left to right, because that's how we read. And you may have to rearrange things a bit so that screen readers can quickly access the information as the student navigates. So as students are using their screen readers, they have quick keys that they can tap on the keyboard, so like Control S. And this way they can bounce around within a document. So when a document or a picture or a paragraph is made accessible, it's easy for that student to navigate. So if we take this chemical symbol of chemical element of chlorine, having just one of these pulled out from the periodic table is not bad. But if this is for a science course, you're probably going to have more than one of these elements pulled out. So an example of having to rearrange this, if you look at the two descriptions, description 1 is much better because you would have to pull out the element symbol and just type that information first so that they know that they're getting the chlorine. Otherwise, if they hit the atomic number of 17, that's time wasted that now they'll have to go to the next line to find out what it is, and that's going to be the element symbol. But by switching the chlorine with the atomic number of 17, as soon as that student hits that first element, they know that's chlorine, and by providing blank space underneath chlorine, if you're going to add more chemical elements, they'll be able to quickly see, okay, that's chlorine, no, I want to get to oxygen, so they can quickly navigate through that text to find out where the information is that they truly need. And they can do that much quickly because it is a very long process when they are listening to screen readers. Okay. And basically the main difference between the two descriptions is that the first one allows you to know that you're coming to the element chlorine first, whereas the second one, it provides more information before it actually says, okay, here's the element name, chlorine. So you know you're getting to it first before all the extra description for it. So now if we look at this, I did provide this as a separate PDF because this decision tree is much bigger than this, and when you put it in PowerPoint, it's smaller. So what I'm going to do is switch to the separate page that I have created for this, and it's the same decision tree, but just in the regular size. So this alt-text decision tree was made by 4 syllables, and what they do is they have created a lot of documents on how to decide on accessibility for images, and how you're going to provide that accessibility. And so the good thing about this is if you are familiar with HTML and you edit with that, whether you are editing within Brightspace or if you are creating your own outside sources and then bringing that information into Brightspace, there's a special way to tag it because, of course, screen readers are going to be accessing this information for the student. And this way, a page is properly tagged. But if you're typing it up into Brightspace, you can, or any platform, you can use this decision tree to decide how you're going to use that image. So you're going to look at what role does that image play. If it's purely decorative, you're just going to give it a simple title. Basically, if it's a picture of an owl, you're going to say a decorative picture of an owl. And by putting the word decorative in there, his screen reader, some students will set up their screen readers to read word for word or sometimes letter for letter. Sometimes they'll have a sentence read one at a time. It just depends on how they have it set up. But if they have it reading word for word, they're going to hit the word decorative and they know they're not looking for a decorative image, they can go ahead and use their quick keys to back out of that information and go find the next image. And this is the HTML tag that you would start off with, the alt equal and double quotes. And in between the double quotes, you would just put the information that you want to have the screen reader display. Is it sensory? So this is where you're going to provide a little bit more information. Maybe it invokes an emotion. So you see a nice sunny, a picture of a field with flowers. Does it invoke the emotion of, oh, it must be springtime because of the daffodils? So if a picture obviously evokes an emotion, that's something else that you want to make sure that you put in your description. So it's not that you think it's evoking an emotion, but if it's obviously evoking an emotion of, oh, it's springtime because you can see the sunlight and it's supposed to evoke happiness or appreciation for spring, that's something you want to mention. If that image is not decorative or just basic sensory, then it's going to be informative. Now you have to decide what information, if it's new information or if it's not new information, what information is it presenting to you? If it's not presenting any new information, then you're done. If it's presenting new information, what type of information? This is where you have to decide if it's short information, if you're going to use the alt text or the alternate text, where it's going to be the short description. If you're going to use the descriptive, where it's a longer description, or sometimes you use images as basically links. So it might be providing, it's not decorative because it provides a purpose. And if you click on the picture and it's supposed to lead to a hyperlink, that's why it's providing that information. So the picture itself is not providing information, it's just providing a spot for you to create a hyperlink. But that would be information that you would mention because if they're getting sighted assistance or if they're going to tutoring, having that information being read out, they know, oh, that's not the picture that I'm focusing on, it's making sure I can access this hyperlink. And so again, this is already up here as a PDF, so in case you wanted to use it for reference, and it does include the HTML for those of you that may be more comfortable editing your information in HTML, and especially if you're going to create outside information on different platforms and within HTML and then bring it in. This way, basically, we want to make sure that screen readers can access the information. So from here, we are now going to look at another great resource. This is going to be the image description guidelines from Benetech Initiative. And I do have a Microsoft Word version of this website because it's more of a it's more of a reference guide so that you can go back to it, but this way you don't have to log back onto the internet just to go to the website unless you want to. So I'm going to go here. And this Diagram Center Benetech initiative, they have their introduction. And at the very bottom, I've linked you all to the table of contents. So if you go down to the bottom, you have your table of contents. And it gives you a lot of great information. And again, it is created as, they created it as Microsoft Word, and I'll recreate it as a PDF just in case more people might prefer one format over the other. And so it gives you an idea of how to use style and language. And when you click on each of these, it gives you more detail. And basically, be concise and be objective. You don't want to give it subjective feelings, so you only want to focus on what you see, even though you might have more knowledge about the subject as you're looking at it. You want to just provide exactly what's there because it's the responsibility of the student to grasp the concept, if there is one. So whether they have to go back to the textbook and get the extra information or not, that's part of their responsibility. And it does give you an idea of how to go from general to specific. So you might have an image that just uses an alt text, the short description. Down the line, you may want to reuse that image because it has a lot of detail that now you want to pull out that other information. So that's the way that you can take one image and decide if it's going to be decorative or if it's going to be informative, and if you want to give a short description and a long description, and if you save that information in a file somewhere, then you don't have to go back and retype that information because you may look at that picture again and decide, oh, I can decide to re-examine that picture and change how I want to do that description. And then again, tone and language, that's more so if you are describing something for different age groups. So if you're describing it for children, say for child development, if they need to describe it so that the children understand it versus if someone's in college and if it's a picture of architecture, they should expect architecture terms to be used, and they, at that point, should know what those terms mean based on the level of that class. So you don't have to take out those special terms, but if it's part of the discipline, it's assumed that that student should know those terms. And then this is where part 2 of it goes within specific image description guidelines, and it breaks down different types of images. So if we go through a few of these. So this is where the drawings, this is where I got the information from. So drawings and paintings, it gives you the guidelines, the different types of descriptions, and again, it's always going to be based on your judgment. And they give you why one fits better than the other based on use of age-appropriate language. And then again, here's that picture of the photograph and the guidelines of looking at photographs like this and deciding how you're going to use it. And cartoons and comics. So there's a lot going on in this cartoon and comic. And it shows you how the guidelines should be when you need to look at what the subject is doing and then if there's text around it. So here is a very good description of what's happening in this comic, and it's showing you how you could take care of that information. Now, we went through chemistry. That's where I got the element of chlorine, and that's, again, something like that where it's mostly text. You might have to rearrange things, but you're free to rearrange things because you're not introducing new information, but sometimes you have to rearrange things to make them more logical, especially if the image has text all over the place, so you would have to bring it into more of a logical format. Now, illustrated diagrams. They go from simple to complex. So here is a simple one that is comparing three different things. And when you look at the embryos and the description, it's showing exactly how you would look at those embryos and describe them in comparison with each other, because that's what this picture of early embryos are doing. So sometimes you have to do that paragraph. When you get to complex diagrams that are comparing objects, now the thing with this is it's actually more of a table. If you look at how the chart is broken up into what looks like pie sections, and on the outer rim, that's where the problem is, because you have all of those verbs and the information, but it's in a curved way. And so is the text that's on most of the diagram. So any diagram can become a table, and usually what I would do with something like this is I would re-represent this information into a table. And that is what they decided to do here. So what they did was they took all that information and made 4 columns and show you all of the information for each different type of finch. So this table information is representative of this graphic here, and sometimes you have to change the entire format of how things are or how things are placed in here. And then we have diagrams comparing events over time. This is where it gets more complex, because you have to break down a diagram, and these are collision diagrams. So you see they have to take collision A, describe what's happening here, and then they go to collision B and describe what's happening. So sometimes you have to take portions of an image and describe it. And of course, we have relational diagrams, so Venn diagrams, tree diagrams, flow charts. Then we get to graphs. This is where it gets really fun. So you get a graph like this bar graph right here, and you have to now, unless it has been detailed by the publisher, and usually these type of graphs are not, they might contain a caption right at the top or right under the bottom. So when it says figure 1, that's a caption. But that usually, very few of these captions have all the information you need. So a student that can't see this information, screen reader is going to reach this graph and it's going to consider it a picture, but it can't determine what is in this picture. So this is why that description will be important, but you have to decide how you're going to break that down. And they do give you guidelines on how to do that. And any chart can become a table. So what they did was separated the quarters out and put the percentages down in a table format. Sometimes it will take you a while to figure out how to make that description, but it's worth it, because then the information is conveyed to the student. So you do have all types of graphs. You have maps. I had to do an entire textbook of geographical maps, and I had to do descriptions for all of them. So they do give you 3 different ways of doing a description, and even though they say description 2 fits the best, you may decide that description 3 fits better. And again, it's going to depend on what information, because you're the creator of the course, you'll know what information is more important that you want to have emphasized. And again, political maps, so any type of maps, they have these guidelines for you, and you see the description can get kind of long. And then the separate area for mathematics, so you do have descriptions that you can create for those equations, expressions, and other math diagrams. So they do have some information on how you would look at that equation and how you would be able to write it in Word format. So it's like taking your equation and making a word problem out of it. So you're creating that in that way, and it does have some guidelines for you there. And then we have tables. So simple tables are easy. We just saw some examples of that. But what if you have a complex table? Like something like this. Now that is a lot of information and a lot of activity going on in this table. So they do give you guidelines on how you can just recreate that. And you have your first table, you have your second table. So basically these were nested tables, and I encounter this a lot, especially in the higher level math. And what I would do is take the nested tables apart the way they did and describe what's happening for each section. So I'm basically describing the table almost 3 times, because what they did was they took 3 tables and combined it. So I'm just reversing what they decided to do. And then finally we have text-only images. So if we look at things like nutrition labels, and that appears a lot in many disciplines, a screen reader is going to encounter this nutrition label as an image. And even unless this image has been run through an optical character reader, those words will not be recognized. So for something like this, using the top-down method of just making a paragraph or a sentence, starting at the top, what is this? So we know it's a nutrition label, and all of the information, they have 3 different ways that you can convey that information. They say description 1 works best, and it does provide adequate information, but depending on if this is like a nutrition course, then description 2 or description 3 might work better. Description 3, it just takes the information out of the paragraph form and lists it in a bullet form, and that's typically how I would do it. I would actually use description. I use description 3 the most if it's a lot of information listed like that, because then it's easier for the student to navigate, because you have a lot of information and a lot of different tags, because you have different types of fats, so maybe they only want the monounsaturated fat. So this way they can tab through and hit it faster versus trying to have JAWS read it as a paragraph and find that information. But again, it's just going to depend on how you want to convey that information. Then we have timelines. Again, it's mostly text only, so you're going to just take that information and list it. You can have, this would be a great one to have in like a sentence form versus nutrition label, because there's usually less information on here. It's just usually points that are explained on that timeline with information about what happened during that time. Okay, again, I do already have the PowerPoint and the Microsoft Word of this website that they created. I'll create a PDF. I don't think they have a PDF up there, but I'll create that and put that up there. And I also already have the what is this? The decision tree. That is already up there. And just as a reminder of how to, once you add your images, how to go back and edit them if you want to. Like say if you put a description up there and you want to change that description. I did put a handout on alternate text description for images, and it just reminds you how to add the description when you're putting it in there, whether you're going the long method or the drag and drop method. and where you can put the information. So if you decide you want to put it directly into Brightspace, there's that giant text box that you can edit HTML in, make things bold, all of the formatting, but then what to do if you decide you're going to have those images in Microsoft Word. So it's a two-sided paper, and it has just some reminder information that I went over in the first seminar, and I just changed it up a little and added it for this seminar. So that is all that I have for you. Does anyone have any questions?
Okay, so any question? Okay, whilst Professor Hart is typing maybe her question or her comment, I would like to summarize something with you. If you have received the checklist for the summer 2019, you will notice that as part of the checklist, we added a note in which we want to reiterate or emphasize by stating in your course, this summer 2019 course, we want you to ensure that every HTML, every URL links should become or should be changed to become descriptive links. And we also want you to start working if you do have colors, if you do have text that you have in different colors, please make sure that whilst you are putting them in Brightspace, there is an accessibility checker, a function that you can click on to determine whether those colors are ADA compliant. So please, we want you to be aware of that. Additionally, things like very simple alt text for images that you put in the course, we want you to also tackle that. We are not talking about a detailed description because we know that that will take time. And we are all taking a baby step to ensure that all our courses online become more accessible. But at the same time, we have to start doing it right now. And that is what I want to kind of remind all of you that when we are looking over courses during the checklist review in summer 2019, don't be surprised if you find out that there is you do have any links that are not accessible, or you do have colors and stuff. We will email you back with that feedback. So please just be aware of that. And a copy of the presentation is going to be made available in this particular course that she's sharing with you. We are waiting for the whole series of training to go through, and we will send you an instruction showing you a step-by-step way of enrolling yourself, self-enroll into this particular course in Brightspace. I think Tanya has a question. If the document Word is uploaded to Brightspace, is it possible to copy portion? Yes, by portion you mean you want to copy just a specific document, specific module from one course to the other? Is that what you mean? Yes, that can be done. You can make a selection of what you want to copy. Yes, you can do that. You don't have to do all like that, the whole course copy. No, you can do what we call selected component of a particular course. Yes, that can be done. You are welcome. Any question? Let me see. Professor Gibson, any question from you, Taylor? Professor Bonnie, Susie Bonner, any question for me? Any question for the presenter? Okay. If there are no more questions, I would like to thank each and every one of you for coming to this webinar. And once again, as I stated earlier on, we are going to make the recording link available, and I'm going to send it out also as part of my reminder for the final and the third and the final series. And I'll send it out, and I'll also put together a self-enroll kind of instruction or how you can get into this course if you do need to go back and review the document that Sarah shared with you during the presentation. Okay, so I wish you all of you a very wonderful end of day. Wonderful. I know next week is supposed to be the spring break, so you guys have a wonderful time. Thank you.